Controversy, once again retweeting a conspiracy theorist who peddles baseless stories. The president's retweets this morning, we'll show them to you. He may have deleted them, but he should have never retweeted them in the first place.
You'll see those in a moment. Meantime, the president's failure to quickly condemn white supremacists has led three big-name CEOs to quit one of his advisory councils completely, while thousands take to the streets here in New York City to protest the president's response. We have it all covered. Let's begin with CNN's Jeff Zeleny live at Trump Tower.
President Trump is waking up here in Trump Tower for the first time since taking office. Now, he's part of his working vacation here from New Jersey to Washington, back here to New York, and controversy has followed him along the way, including a tweet he sent out overnight echoing the message of a conspiracy theorist. Only hours after attempting to quell the outrage over his initial response to the deadly violence in Charlottesville, President Trump retweeting a prominent supporter and conspiracy theorist. The president's retweet originated from Jack Posobiec, a prolific social media user the Anti-Defamation League says is a member of the so-called alt-right. The ADL says the movement rejects overt white supremacist views, but embraces misogyny and xenophobia. The ADL has also highlighted Posobiec's frequent anti-Muslim tweets and harassment of former Hillary Clinton aide Huma Abedin. Posobiec was granted access to the White House press briefing in May.
President Seth Rich, can we talk about Seth Rich?
Posobiec has peddled a number of debunked conspiracy theories online, including a baseless story that the Democratic National Committee was behind the death of former staffer Seth Rich. The claim was the subject of a Fox News story that has since been retracted and deleted. And the Pizzagate hoax, which alleges that top Democrats were operating a child sex trafficking ring out of a D.C. pizza shop during last year's campaign. On Monday, the president caved to pressure, condemning white supremacists and other hate groups by name.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
CNN has learned that the president insisted on addressing the economy before making these additional remarks, which came 2 days after the death of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville.
President, can you explain why you did not condemn those hate groups by name over the weekend? They've been condemned. They have been condemned.
Hours later, shortly before leaving the White House, the president took aim at the media for the controversy that has now cost him the support of three CEOs on his American Manufacturing Council. The CEO of Intel becoming the third business leader to step down, saying in part, "I resign because I want to make progress," while many in Washington seem to be more concerned with attacking anyone who disagrees with them. The president's do-over also does not appear to have been enough for thousands of protesters who line the streets outside of Trump Tower ahead of Mr. Trump's arrival last night.
No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA. No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA.
Now, police are bracing for more protesters here at Trump Tower today. Chris and Poppy, you can see heavy security line behind me, including these big dump trucks here in front of Trump Tower. But the president is scheduled to hold meetings on his infrastructure plan and other matters here. He's surrounded by some advisors, but one advisor who is not here in New York at Trump Tower with him is Steve Bannon, the White House chief strategist, who is on thin ice this morning again. We're keeping our eye on that to see if Steve Bannon can withstand this latest storm.
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much for the reporting. Now, moments ago, we spoke with Marcus Martin and Marissa Blair. Marcus is the man you see toppled in this photo. He was in Charlottesville. He was there with his fiancee, Marissa Blair, who you met on the show yesterday. In an instant, he pushed his fiancee out of the way, even though he knew that meant he was going to get hit by the car. He suffered a broken leg and other injuries. Both he and Marissa knew the woman who was killed in the same incident, Heather Heyer. Here's part of what we talked about this morning. Marcus, how you feeling? How's your leg? How's your heart?
Heavy. It's just a lot of pain. There's a lot to cope with.
It is. We see that you both have the shirts on to support Heather this morning. What do you want people to know about why you were there?
Because I wanted to stand up and spread love. I wasn't gonna attend the rally. But then I get on Facebook and I see videos of them just beating them with torches. And that's what I stand for. Like, I stand for my black community. I stand for everything that what's right. And by me being able to see what was really going on, I couldn't allow myself not to go.
Do you remember yourself being on the street and the car coming?
Yes, sir.
How do you remember it?
Yes, sir. The only thing I remember is we was walking up the street, and the car was just sitting there, just there. And then out of nowhere, I'm looking down at my phone, and then you hear the tire screech, and then I look up, and then bodies just flying. And I just thought for one split second, I didn't think about myself. I thought about my fiance. I had to protect her. That's why I'm here for her protection. And I put it all on the line for her.
Did you know you were going to get hit when you moved her out of the way?
There was a big chance of me getting hit, but I'd do it all over again just to make sure that everything's okay with her.
A car coming at you, that's a deadly weapon, and it took your friend's life. It could have taken a lot of lives. And how are you guys feeling together since that moment?
I mean, we're just happy to be together. I was telling him last night, being at the rally, being at the counter protest, and seeing all the hate that was going on with the protesters, it made me not think that maybe the world isn't such a great place. Maybe human beings aren't so great. But ever since the event, we've gotten nothing but love and support and kindness from people all over the world, people we don't even know. And it just shows you that there is still good in the world, that I'm so lucky to have someone like him to be by my side to protect me. And we grew to love each other more and more each day, but this is unexplainable how much our bond has grown since then.
What do you make of that idea that people like you and your fiance and Heather Heyer, who were down there to oppose the white supremacists, were somehow equally in the wrong for being there and for what happened?
The only individual that's in the wrong of this whole entire situation is the guy that ran the car into a peaceful protest. Yeah, there was a lot of wrong going on down there, but that protest that I was in, and as my fiance was in, it was peaceful. We wasn't spreading hate, we were spreading love. We was chanting whose streets, our streets. That's the only thing we chanted.
Racists go home.
We don't want you here, and that's all we said. And I guess that led to the tragic event that occurred. And he took it upon himself to walk out the rally, to get in his car, to find out where the good protest was going, and you find us and you run us down. And then I feel multiple times that people saying he's 20 years old, it was an accident. He knew exactly what he was doing. His intentions was clear. He wanted pain, he wanted hurt, he wanted blood. That's what he was after. You come down to Charlottesville. Yes, everybody that was out there, we were out there at their own risk. It was at our own risk. But we was out there for standing up for things that we believed in. And we wasn't out there to protest hate or anything. The only thing we was doing was standing up for the things we believed in. That's all. That's all.
Strikes me, Chris, he wasn't even going to go. And he said, I saw the hate. I saw what they were doing. I saw it on Facebook. And then I wanted to go and stand up also, just like Heather did, for what's right and become a hero in the meantime.
Yeah, and they're also an example of a different reality, which is for those who are laboring under the misperception that you had these neo-Nazis who were somehow in some kind of conflict with these extremist lefty groups that are equally as violent and disgusting. Yes, you do have bad actors that find their way into the left, and there have been violence and other things. But the people you were just seeing there, that was the majority of, overwhelmingly, of who was there to protest against the white supremacists. That's why, drawing any equivalence, the president making the case that that's why he needed to be measured is so offensive to so many because it doesn't meet the reality.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that they shared their stories with us this morning. Let's talk about all of this and the political fallout. Our panelists here, CNN analyst David Gregory, CNN politics reporter, editor-at-large Chris Cillizza, and CNN contributor J.D. Vance. David Gregory, to you first. The president last night, instead of, tweeting about Heather or Marissa or Marcus, he chose to retweet a conspiracy theorist, the guy who peddled the Seth Rich conspiracy about his murder, the guy who peddled the Pizzagate conspiracy, which, a month after that, another guy shows up and shoots up the D.C. pizzeria, so violence ensued after that. This in the midst of a
and the mistake was a completely unsatisfactory response to this violence over the weekend that had to be corrected with the guidance of some of his advisors, then to undercut that by this lack of discipline, getting on Twitter, retweeting some of these people, and just showing that it was something perhaps he was just going through the motions to do. It makes me question the impact, frankly, of General Kelly as chief of staff, whether the president's really listening to him, whether he wants to be a more disciplined president who's focused on his agenda. I mean, there's no other way to look at it, that the president was kind of dragged into to giving a more forceful statement. And I think it's ironic that as we talk about protecting the First Amendment rights of the KKK and others who peddle this hate, which we absolutely should, because that's what America stands for. They're also preaching a worldview that would not offer those freedoms to other people, lest anybody get confused. And I don't think the president is really absorbing this. He still gives them space because he doesn't want to alienate them. And that's something I just can't understand.
Well, and Cillizza, I think that to add to David's point with your own, you see what matters to the president here by his actions. What he didn't say in the first instance, how he put it the second time, what he decided to retweet, what he decided to tweet and then delete just this morning. Put up a couple of the ones. Look, to many people this will be funny / harmless, but now, on the heels of what you're trying to heal in Charlottesville, you retweet something. Yes, he deleted it. But he retweeted a train bashing into us, an obvious violent thing. He retweeted something else where someone, I think the president thought was being supportive of him, where he said, I'm going to quit Twitter because the president just retweeted me. And then someone pointed out to the president that the guy's tweet was about he probably supporting Joe Arpaio because this man believes Arpaio is a fascist, and the suggestion is obvious that that's something that the president would like, so then he deleted it. This is where his head is. This is what he values.
Yeah, Chris, I always rejected this idea. No one really says it anymore, but early in his presidency that you have to ignore his Twitter feed. Even many Democrats said, ignore his Twitter feed. It's all just a distraction. His Twitter feed is the main line into Donald Trump's cerebral cortex. This is how he thinks and what he cares about. I'll give you a somewhat less controversial than the tweets overnight and this morning. How about yesterday? 2 tweets about the Merck CEO, Ken Frazier, who left an advisory council, 0 tweets about Charlottesville. I mean, again, it speaks to what he is focused on and what he cares about. I kept overnight and when I got up this morning thinking about why would he retweet an alt-right conspiracy theorist who's a well-known alt-right conspiracy. This is not an account with 5 people. This guy has a following, unfortunately. And, the reason is, I think, because Donald Trump basically divides the world into people who love him and people who hate him. And if you love him and if you're telling the story he wants to be told, you're good. And, that's it. He doesn't really go beyond that. It doesn't really matter what else you've said or done, or if it does, he doesn't, well, he said something nice about me. I mean, remember his first response when asked about Vladimir Putin. If he says nice things about me, I'll say nice things about him, right? That's who the guy fundamentally is. There's no gray area. It's why he always says we're fake news, because we don't report nice things about him, which, of course, as we all know, is not our job.
So, J.D. Vance, as someone who was born in Kentucky, sort of a major area of support for this president in this election. You then grew up in Ohio. You have a unique perspective on some of this. You said this week, I think it's tempting and comforting to try to stereotype these white nationalists as a bunch of knuckle-dragging, slack-jawed yokels. Explain.
Well, I think that whenever you have an incident like this, we try to find people who are not like us and say these ideas only belong to those other people. And it's convenient and it's tempting because it allows us to absolve ourselves of any responsibility that we might have or that our broader community might have in actually addressing these problems. And what worries me about the response to this particular white nationalist terrorist attack, a lot of things worry me, but one thing that worries me is that we're trying to paint this white nationalist movement as a movement primarily of poor and working class Americans, when the truth is that the alt-right is actually led by better educated and frankly pretty well-to-do people. So this is not a problem for just people from my community. It's actually mostly a problem, I think, for those who are doing pretty well, who have good educations and good jobs. And so effectively we need to accept that racism is a problem across the country. It's not just a problem to point the finger at poor whites and say this all belongs on you.
Well, JD, let's stay with that point for a second, because let me just have JD follow up on this, David, and then please weigh in. The idea that we're seeing develop here is, okay, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, okay, they shouldn't have been down there with tiki torches and doing anything violent. But what about all those lefty extremists also? I don't see where that meets the facts of this situation. And it gets a little frightening when I see so many people defending these white supremacists that way on social media. How do you take it?
Yeah, well, there's no defense, and unfortunately in this country we're suffering from a real problem of whataboutism, which is whenever something bad happens, people automatically try to point the finger at somebody else so that the finger doesn't get pointed at themselves. And look, there is definitely left-wing violence. We saw that in President Trump's inauguration, but as we just watched with the young man who was run over by the car, that wasn't the main thing that was happening in Charlottesville. And the only really bad thing that happened in Charlottesville is that someone was killed by a terrorist. And I think that we need to be able to talk about that, to point the finger at that evil and name it without trying to point the finger at somebody else.
David Gregory, weigh in.
Yeah, just a couple. First of all, J.D. Vance is fantastic, and his book is fantastic. Not that he needs any help selling it for me or anybody else, but the perspective is so important on a couple of levels. One, there's a larger argument and feeling in this country about politics. It is about a lot of people who look up at all of this, and maybe they condemn the KKK, but they feel that there is a kind of political correctness. That elites and liberals have taken over and have marginalized them and made them into bigots when they're not. I think that's part of the undercurrent in our politics. And there's another point. Let's remember why these fascists were down there. It was to oppose the removal of a statue of General Robert E. Lee, who led the Confederate forces during the Civil War. This is going on in New Orleans. It's going on in other parts of the country. There's a bigger discussion to be had about America's memory of the Confederacy and why. And it's appropriate that we have it, because these were people, including General Lee, who were enemies of America. He fought against America and to protect the enslavement of black people. Let's have that conversation. And let's not let the KKK lead the conversation. Let's have our military leaders, some of whom I've spoken to, who think it's completely inappropriate that we keep lionizing these bigots without, first of all, the proper context of what else was going on. And by the way, how many black families in Northern Virginia or throughout Virginia have to send their kids to a school named after General Lee or some other enemy of America who fought to enslave black people? This is a real conversation to have.
You also had a very other obvious hypocrisy at play here, Chris Cillizza, which was Donald Trump and people around him are the same people who are saying you have to call Muslim terror, radical Islamic terror. You have to call it that because you have to name the problem. And
that's
what it is.
So many times.
Yes, even though his own Secretary of Defense spoke to him the same wisdom of so many others, which was, don't give the terrorists ownership of a faith. It's not only numerically false, it's just subjectively false. You're giving them what they want. He ignored it. He did it because it's so important to name the problem, Chris. And then here, they say, well, we didn't want to dignify them. We didn't want to give them the attention. It rings false in a frightening way to a lot of people. It seems almost, Chris, like he was trying to defend these groups.
I mean, he didn't want to do it. I mean, that's why he didn't do it, for the same reason that he opened with the economy and jobs in a speech that should have just been about Charlottesville yesterday, right? He does what he wants to do. He doesn't listen. That's why I always think we focus, and I understand we should focus on the fact that there's a new chief of staff in the White House, right? That's an important job. But the truth of the matter is, Donald Trump does whatever he wants to do. That's been the through line of his entire life. He makes controversy. He is a provocateur. This is who this person has been, is, and I feel comfortable in this prediction, will be for the remainder of his presidency and the remainder of his life. That's who he is what he believes. You saw yesterday, this was, I think in some ways, like when I make my 8-year-old apologize for something he doesn't think he did wrong. Hey, I'm really sorry. Like, this was not Donald Trump. This was him saying, the economy is great. I'm going to talk about that. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to name these people, but I'm going to make it clear that twice he says, as I've said repeatedly, or as I said on Saturday, because why does he say that? Because he thinks he's already done enough, and he wants to make sure that you know it's grudging. And that's to David's point about a conversation. And JD's, my wife tells me every day that JD, I need to be more like JD. I think what's important here is, you know who can lead that conversation? A president, right? And that's why Saturday was so problematic, and even his response yesterday was so problematic, because it's an abdication of moral leadership, and that matters well beyond Republican and Democrat.
JD, you know, part of the charge of being president is to bring a country together when it is most divided. And this is a president who likes to quote Abraham Lincoln, who likes to say we are the party of Abraham Lincoln. But now, is it not his charge to bind up the nation's wounds? Is it not his charge to do what Lincoln said in his second inaugural? And can he do that?
Well, I think it is his charge, and I do think that he can do that. Obviously, it's a question of whether he chooses to. What really bothers me about last weekend is that if you think about how divided this country is along virtually every dimension, the one thing, or one of the few things that really unites us, is the idea that Nazis are bad. I mean, we are the country whose grandparents defeated the Nazis. And so the fact that this provides an opportunity for the president to go and say, this is the thing that should really unite us together, and it was a missed opportunity. He chose not to name that enemy. He chose not to make it about what unifies us as a country. I do think is a missed opportunity, and it will continue to be a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and it wound up creating a new division because he forced the media, really, you know, to take it on, to take on the mantle of the discussion.
Republicans.
It's true. People had to take up the conversation because he failed to do it in the moment when it mattered. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the value of your perspective this morning. Appreciate it. So, President Trump's finally denouncing the hate groups by name. What did it do? What was the net effect of the statement that you see on your screen right now? We'll ask the head of the GOP in Virginia now. The fact is, it took 2 days for President Trump to denounce the hate groups involved in the deadly violence in Charlottesville. Joining me now is the chairman of Virginia's Republican Party, John Whitbeck. It's good to have you, sir.
Hey, good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. How do you feel the community is there in Northern Virginia? Do you believe, you're in Leesburg this morning, but we're hearing reports that Charlottesville, that the memorials, the vigils, and what we'll see for Heather Heyer when her funeral procession is had, that these are all helping these events to bring people together and move forward. Is that your sense?
It's a wonderful aftermath from a terrible weekend to have the unity that we have in Virginia right now. I mean, here in my home county of Loudoun County, we've had a vigil last night, and there's another one coming up. So it's a nonpartisan issue. People are united: Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and in wake of a terrible tragedy, it's good to see Virginia coming together.
Members of your party, as you know, stepped up against the President of the United States, called him out for not calling out the hate groups there by name, and did so themselves. What did you make of that moment? Do you think the criticism was justified?
You know, the statement that we saw on yesterday was the statement we wanted to see on Saturday. But, you know, at the same time, we were, as Virginians, focused on what was going on with all of our leadership and how they were reacting, what they were doing to respond on the ground minute by minute. I mean, from the Democrat governor, who I don't give a lot of credit to, but I do give credit for this weekend, Ed Gillespie, our nominee for governor, you know, all of our elected officials on the ground throughout Virginia. You know, everybody was united behind it. It was a nonpartisan issue, and the president's statement really meant a lot to us yesterday, at least from what I'm hearing from the people I've talked to since then.
And the too little, too late argument, you put any stock in that or no? Better late than never?
Well, I think I read somewhere that it was something like 54 minutes after the beginning of the event or something like that. And, you know, I think if we start parsing out how much time it took and too little, too late and all the different things, we're getting away from the fact that 3 people died on Saturday, an innocent woman and 2 of our fine state police officers. I think that's the focus of what it should be. And the president's statement went a long way to bringing us back to that focus. I mean, these people are violent, hate-filled racists, and they have no place in our Commonwealth. And Republicans, Democrats, and independents have all been very vocal from the
Alabama voters head to the polls today for a special primary election to fill Jeff Sessions' Senate seat. The Republican race is one to watch. The field is crowded. It's also competitive. But only one candidate is getting the big endorsement from the President of the United States, who even tweeted about him this morning. Will that be enough? CNN's Victor Blackwell has more.
Sweet home Alabama, the state that handed President Donald Trump his biggest election night victory in the Deep South, 28 points. Now, the frontrunners in the GOP primary race for the Senate seat once held by Attorney General Jeff Sessions are battling to prove who is the truest Trump diehard.
The same Washington insiders who don't like President Trump are trying to stop our campaign.
I'm working with President Trump to drain the swamp.
I vote with President Trump 95% of the time.
Controversial former state Supreme Court Judge Roy Moore, Northern Alabama Congressman Mo Brooks, and appointed placeholder Senator Luther Strange are all cozying up to the president ahead of the August 15th primary, despite Trump's slipping job approval rating nationally. That's because his numbers are much stronger among Republicans here.
In Alabama, which is what I care most about, his numbers are closer to 90%.
Still, not as strong as Alabama's support for Sessions. He ran unopposed in 2014 and was reelected with more than 97% of the vote. So when the president described AG Sessions as weak and beleaguered, candidates were forced to balance their support for a popular president with voters' dislike of the attacks against Alabama's favorite son.
Do you think the president should continue? Should he stop the criticisms publicly?
That's not for me to say. I'm not going to judge the president's actions. I wouldn't want him judging mine.
Jeff Sessions is a personal friend of mine, and in this family dispute, I'm siding with Jeff Sessions.
It's possible for us to support both the president and our attorney general. It's a tough environment in Washington, and I support both of them.
After just 6 months in the Senate, Strange has endeared a powerful ally, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. McConnell's super PAC is flooding Alabama with TV and radio ads attacking Moore and Brooks.
Roy Moore, there's so much more.
Mo Brooks even refused to endorse Donald Trump for president.
The move to aggressively endorse one Republican over others is an effort to manage the party's slim Senate majority to pass legislation. These two have vowed to buck McConnell in the Senate. They say he's part of the swamp.
I believe the people of Alabama don't like being told by Washington special interest groups who to consider, and I believe that's going to backfire against Mitch McConnell's boy.
I will vote to repeal Obamacare and replace Mitch McConnell.
President Trump also recorded a robocall for Senator Luther Strange that went out to voters across the state overnight. Now, the threshold, 50% plus one. If no one reaches that, the top two vote getters will go on to a runoff in September. But the one to watch is Judge Roy Moore. You'll remember that he was removed from the bench twice. First for refusing to remove a monument to the Ten Commandments, then for ordering the enforcement of an overturned same-sex marriage ban. The question here is, can he reach that 50%? Some analysts across the state say it's possible, and that will, of course, move him to the general election in December. Polls open in 10 minutes. Poppy?
Fascinating piece, Victor Blackwell there in Alabama. Thank you very much for that. Ahead for us, fired over a controversial...
Pets deserve it. Beyond. With Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Tuesday, August 15th, 6 o'clock here in New York. Allison is off. Poppy Harlow joining me this week. Thank you for doing it, my friend. Appreciate having you. Here's our starting line. Hours after caving to pressure to condemn white supremacists and other hate groups by name, President Trump went right back to the fringe, retweeting a right-wing conspiracy theorist who peddled baseless stories. Thousands taking to the streets to protest the president's response outside Trump Tower, while others toppled a Confederate monument in North Carolina. Even the late-night hosts doing what the president did not, getting serious and specific to address the deadly violence.
Now, the president's failure to quickly condemn those white supremacists has led three big-name CEOs to quit one of his advisory councils completely. This as Charlottesville prepares for a memorial for Heather Heyer, killed for standing up to hate. All of this as the president's controversial chief strategist Steve Bannon appears to be on very thin ice. He's laying low, apparently hasn't talked to the president about his future, nor met face-to-face with him in about a week. We have it all covered. Let's begin with Jeff Zeleny live at Trump Tower here in New York City, where the president last night was met by a lot of protesters.
Good morning, Poppy. President Trump is waking up here in Trump Tower for the first time in some 7 months. And as you said, he did arrive here late last night to thousands of protesters here on the streets of New York City. He was trying to put one controversy behind him, but overnight a tweet sparked a new one.
Only hours after attempting to quell the outrage over his initial response to the deadly violence in Charlottesville, President Trump retweeting a prominent supporter and conspiracy theorist. The president's retweet originated from Jack Posobiec, a prolific social media user the Anti-Defamation League says is a member of the so-called alt-right. The ADL says the movement rejects overt white supremacist views, but embraces misogyny and xenophobia. The ADL has also highlighted Posobiec's frequent anti-Muslim tweets and harassment of former Hillary Clinton aide Huma Abedin. Posobiec was granted access to the White House press briefing in May.
President Seth Rich, can we talk about Seth Rich?
Posobiec has peddled a number of debunked conspiracy theories online, including a baseless story that the Democratic National Committee was behind the death of former staffer Seth Rich. The claim was the subject of a Fox News story that has since been retracted and deleted. And the Pizzagate hoax, which alleges that top Democrats were operating a child sex trafficking ring out of a D.C. pizza shop during last year's campaign. On Monday, the president caved to pressure, condemning white supremacists and other hate groups by name.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
CNN has learned that the president insisted on addressing the economy before making these additional remarks, which came 2 days after the death of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville.
Mr. President, can you explain why you did not condemn those hate groups by name over the weekend?
They've been condemned. They have been condemned.
Hours later, shortly before leaving the White House, the president took aim at the media for the controversy that has now cost him the support of 3 CEOs on his American Manufacturing Council. The CEO of Intel becoming the 3rd business leader to step down Tuesday night, saying in part, "I resign because I want to make progress," while many in Washington seem to be more concerned with attacking anyone who disagrees with them. The president's do-over also does not appear to have been enough for thousands of protesters who line the streets outside of Trump Tower ahead of Mr. Trump's arrival last night.
No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA. No Trump, no KKK, no fascist
Now, this is another stop on President Trump's working vacation. He'll be here for the next couple days, holding meetings later today on infrastructure. We're scheduled to hear from him this afternoon. He's surrounded by some advisors, but Chris and Poppy, one advisor who is not with him is Steve Bannon, the chief strategist at the White House, who is on thin ice, we are told, by several advisors. The president will be making a decision whether to keep him on board or to follow the advice of many of his supporters and close advisors to push him aside. So that's one of the things weighing on the president's mind, even as all this controversy still swells over Charlottesville. Chris?
All right, Jeff, appreciate the reporting. So the simple question is whether or not the president has made the situation better or worse. Joining us now is the vice mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, Wes Bellamy. Mr. Mayor, it's good to have you with us this morning. What is the state and the mood of your city? Are things still calm there? How is it?
Thank you for having me. And before we begin, I think it's important for us to express our sincerest condolences to Sister Heather, as well as the two officers who lost their lives over the weekend. Our prayers are with their family. Now to your question. I believe personally that the mood here on the ground is a group of individuals, which we call the great city of Charlottesville, ready to move forward. Last night, we attended a community meeting at the African American Heritage Center, in which I saw nearly 500 people in attendance, all from all different races, ages, nationalities, looking to bring about solutions. After that, I came here back to the park. There was another vigil that was being held by a group of clergy members and just different members here in the park, and they all were standing together, holding arms, ready to move forward, ready to show that our community is one of resilience, one of determination, and one that will not only not be intimidated, but one that will progress and become even bolder and more united after this. So I'm encouraged, to say the least.
Did you feel that the president helped with what he said yesterday?
I believe that 45 did make some strides in regards to specifically condemning the white supremacists and the KKK. However, I must admit that I was rather disappointed in seeing the tweet that went out last night. And listen, I want to be clear. I'm not one who sits on some moral high horse who says that I've never made mistakes or never done anything in my life so that I can condemn everyone else. But what we are indeed looking for is leadership. But I would love to move away from the remarks and the comments from 45 and focus more on what's going on here in the ground in Charlottesville. Listen, today is 3 days after the tragedy that occurred, and we still have more work to do, and that work is getting done. We have economic equity to address, affordable housing issues to address, criminal justice issues to address, equity in relations throughout the city to address, and those are the things that we're going to continue to do. Our young students start school next week, and we're going to make sure that our kids are ready for school. We're going to make sure that they have the best opportunities to learn through mentoring programs, after-school programs, and also showing them that this is a community that cares and this is a unified place. So again, I'm not as concerned with what 45 is doing. I'm more so concerned with us progressing as a community, and that work, I can assure you, will get done.
Wes, quick question. Why do you refer to the president as 45? Yes, he is the 45th president, but is that intentional or is that just a quick term?
Well, that's just what I call him. I believe that when he begins to act as if he deserves to be in that office and leads in terms of unifying people, then he will deserve the name of President Trump. But at this point, I believe that he has not done the things in regards to bringing this country together. He has not done the things in regards to making us a more unified place. Nor has he decided to condemn the individuals in a rapid pace, or as he should, or speak out in the way in which we believe he should. But again, I'm not here to talk about 45. I'm here to talk about the great people of Charlottesville. And we are a great city. We're not a perfect city. We're a place of imperfect people looking to make this place better. But I guarantee you, we will be stronger and more united than ever.
All right, Wes Bellamy, Vice Mayor for Charlottesville, thank you very much for joining us. And please keep us apprised of the situation down there and the progress that's made.
Much love, Seville. Stronger together.
All right, be well. Poppy.
All right, let's bring in our panel to talk about all of this because there's a lot to get through this morning. CNN political commentator Errol Lewis is here. And Errol, so much to talk about. I do think it's an interesting note that the vice mayor is just calling him 45. Let's get to that in a moment. However, the retweet, the president last night Instead of doubling down on his comments calling out these white supremacist groups by name, he chose to retweet someone who is not just controversial. This guy peddles in conspiracy theories. He's the one who peddled the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which became dangerous. He made something up that Democrats and Hillary Clinton's team was somehow involved in a child sex ring at a D.C. pizzeria. Well, you know what? It's not just a conspiracy theory. A guy goes there a month later and shoots the place up. This is dangerous, and the president is retweeting something from him in the last 12 hours.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. This is, among other things, you have, once again, what's called dog whistle politics, where this is kind of a wink and a nod from the president to some of the worst elements of society, people who have spread conspiracy theories, people who have spread hate, people who have sort of taken us up to the brink of violence, and occasionally we see people take the next step into violence. And so this is something that a responsible leader would go nowhere near. This is something that a White House, would have been unthinkable prior to now to see something like that coming essentially from the Oval Office. And we call them tweets because that's a technological term.
It's a written statement
It is a written statement from the President of the United States, right? And so for him to even indirectly endorse something like that, I think we all know by now what this is all about. He's done this over and over and over again, starting with the birther conspiracies that he peddled for years. All of these are signals. And as we saw over the last weekend, people take that seriously. And, the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan will stand there, look into the camera and say, we are fulfilling a mission that we got from President Trump. I mean, it is shocking. I think the good side of all of this, of course, is that there are others, including corporate leaders, as we're seeing, who are going to step forward and sort of fill a leadership vacuum that this president, for whatever reason, has chosen to leave behind.
Right. And look, leadership is often about moments, and moments are often a function of timing. What the president didn't say initially matters. The timing of this retweet matters. Right on the heels of supposedly doing the right thing, he does something that can only be considered the wrong thing. So let's bring in Karin Demerjian. There's going to be talk about this vice mayor in Charlottesville refusing to say the name of the president. They'll say that was disrespectful, and he's an elected official. He should be better than that, or maybe he's appointed. I don't know. The vice mayor is probably appointed. But when the president does something like retweeting somebody who peddles the Seth Rich conspiracy theory, isn't he asking for it, Karin?
Well, it depends on who you're asking, I guess. I mean, he's certainly setting himself up for more criticism, for more anger that's pointed in his direction. Look, the last few days did not go well for the President of the United States. He did not read the country and the mood of the country correctly in waiting so long to amend his statement from Saturday to include those groups, the KKK, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, that he finally named yesterday. And it's at best a little tone deaf to follow that up with this. I mean, the question is, are we in a position still where people want to give the president the benefit of the doubt, that he's just a little bit clueless when it comes to